Hello! Today we are going to be working on solving and writing proportions. So when you solve a proportion, we have a cross method that we do to help us solve it. And what that means is you are cross multiplying to set up a one-step equation. So when you cross multiply, 4 times x gives us 4x. And then you do the other side as well, so that then 9 times 10 gives us 90. Now remember, with a one-step equation, we're trying to get x by itself, which means we need to move this 4 over to the other side. And to move it over to the other side of the equal sign, we use what's called inverse operations. So you have to do the inverse, so in other words, you have to do the opposite of whatever is happening right now. Whatever operation is happening right now. So the 4 and the x currently are multiplying, so the opposite of multiplying would be dividing. So we're going to divide by 4 on both sides, and we are going to get x equals, and then in your calculator, if you guys were to take 90 divided by 4, we get 22.5, and that is our answer. Okay, so moving on to number 2. So number 2 here, again, when you're trying to solve for a missing variable in a proportion, you cross multiply. So if we were to take 5.5 times x, that gives us 5.5x. Then if we were to take 6 times 2, that gives us 12. And again, to get x by itself, I need to get rid of this 5.5 by doing the inverse operation of whatever operation it's currently doing. So since the 5.5 and the x are multiplying, the opposite of multiplying is to divide it. So I'm going to divide by 5.5 on both sides, and I'm going to get x equals, and then take 12 divided by 5.5 in your calculator, and we get 2.18 repeating. Alright, so next one, again, you can cross multiply. So 5 times x is 5x. 2 times 2 is 4. And then to get a by itself, you got to divide by that 5 on both sides. So 4 divided by 5 gives us 0.8. Alright, so let me do 3 more with you guys, and then I'll have you guys try the bottom row on your own. So again, I see a missing variable in a proportion, so I am going to cross multiply. So 27 times x is 27x. Cross multiply your other side, so 21 times 18 is 378. And then last step is to divide by that 27 on both sides. So 378 divided by 27 gives me 14. Alright, next one. So again, cross multiply. So 15 times y is 15y. Cross multiply the other side. So 21 times 20 is 420. And then last step is to divide by that 15 on both sides. And we get y equals 28. Alright, and then the last one here, number 6. So again, cross multiply. I always like to cross multiply the variable first because that's just the easiest to set up. So here it's going to be 39 times b, which is 39b. Cross multiply this side, so 26 times 9 gives me 234. And then to get that b by itself, we are going to divide by that 39 on both sides, and we get b is equal to 6. Okay, so I want you guys to try the bottom 3. So go ahead and try out these 3 problems on your own. So I want you guys to pause the video and then press play when you guys are ready for the answer. All right, so you guys should be done with these 3 problems. So let's see how you guys did. So this one, you guys should have gotten 56.4H equals, and then 42.3 times 144 gave you 6091.2, so 6091.2. And then to get that H by itself, you guys should have divided by that 56.4 on both sides. And you should have gotten 108. Also, it is essential that you guys show the proper work, so your guys' paper should look exactly like mine. The only thing that you really don't have to do is just show me this part right here with the circles, okay? But you do need to show me the one-step equation for the proper algebraic steps to get to your answer, okay? All right, so next one, you should have gotten 45W equals, and then 792 times 70 is 55,440. And then last step was to divide by that 45 on both sides, and you should have gotten 1,232. All right, and then the last one, so 120 times J was 120J. 16 times 15 gave you 240. So then last step was to divide by that 120 on both sides, and you should have gotten J equals 2. So good job if you guys got that. So again, when you're trying to find a missing variable in a proportion, you're cross multiplying and setting up a one-step equation in order to solve it to get your variable by itself. All right, so this is how you solve a proportion. So let's go ahead and move on to the back side to show you how to set them up with word problems. So for each word problem, write and then solve the proportion to find the answer. Be sure to set it up the correct way and to show all work. So the main thing with proportions is you have to make sure that your units stay proportional throughout your proportion. So let's do the first one. So a 380 cubic centimeter sample of titanium has a mass of 1,710 grams. Find the weight of a titanium sample that has a volume of 532 cubic centimeters. Write and then solve a proportion to find the answer. Okay, so the first thing that I like to do when I'm looking at a problem is anytime that you guys see 3 numbers and they want you guys to find another answer, this is when you are going to have to set up some type of proportion, because in a proportion there's going to be 3 numbers with the missing variable that you're going to have to solve. Okay, now in your proportion you need to keep everything aligned based off of the variables that we're talking about. So this 380 was talking about cubic centimeters, this 1,710 was talking about grams, and this 532 was also talking about cubic centimeters. So if you guys can see, the only 2 variables that we're talking about here are cubic centimeters and grams. It does not matter which one you put in the numerator and which one you put in the denominator. So let's just say I'm going to put cubic centimeters in the numerator and then grams in the denominator. Now the reason that I'm showing you guys this over here is because whenever I go to set up my proportion, these numbers in the numerator are going to represent the cubic centimeters, and these numbers in the denominator are going to represent the grams. So the first number that I see was the 380 cubic centimeter sample talking about the 1,710 grams. So this is my first fraction in my proportion. Okay, now I just need to decide, is it going to go 380 over 1710 or 1710 over 380? Well, we know that the 380 is going to be in the numerator since our numerator is going to be talking about cubic centimeters, and the 380 was also talking about cubic centimeters. So I'm going to put 380 in my numerator. And then when it had a 380 cubic centimeter sample, we had a 1,710 grams. So since grams is in my denominator, I'm going to put the 1710 in my denominator as well. Then they want us to find the weight of the titanium sample that has a volume of 532 cubic centimeters. So the 532 is going to go over here in my second proportion. I just need to decide, is it going to go in the numerator or is it going to go in the denominator? Well, 532 was talking about cubic centimeters. I have cubic centimeters in my numerator, so I want to keep the 532 cubic centimeters in the numerator as well. So your missing spot is the thing that you're trying to solve, so that will always be where your variable goes, okay? So once you set up your proportion, it's just like what we did on the front side with cross multiplying. So when you take 380 times x, you get 380x. Then when you take 1710 times 532, we get 909,720. And then your last step to get x by itself is to divide by that 380 on both sides. So we get x equals 2,394. And the main thing that you guys need to remember about word problems is in your answer you also need to have the variable, and the easiest way is to see that what the variable is talking about is notice how x was in our denominator here, and what was our denominator talking about? Well, it was talking about grams, so my variable here is also going to be grams. Okay, so no, you guys don't have to write this, but I feel like this showing this part is super important because it helps you knowing where your variables go, where your numbers go in the proportion to make sure that you have everything aligned. Okay. All right, so let's try the next one. The Big Town football team outscored its opponent 5-2 last season. If their opponent scored 38 points, how many points did Big Town score? So when they write a ratio, the first number is talking about what they talked about first. So in this case, the 5 is representing the Big Town football team. And then the second variable that they're talking about is the second number in the ratio. So this 2 is talking about their opponents. So again, in my proportion, I just need to make sure that my variables stay aligned. So let's say the Big Town football team would be my numerator, and then their opponents will be my denominator. Okay, so the first fraction is going to be this ratio 5-2. Again, just make sure that the 5 is representing the Big Town football team, which we have in the numerator, and then this 2 is representing their opponents, which we have in the denominator. So our first fraction is going to be that 5/2. Then it says if their opponent scored 38 points, how many points did Big Town score? So notice how the 38 points was talking about our opponents. So over here in our second fraction, we need to make sure that the 38 goes in the denominator since the 38 was talking about the opponent's points. So our missing variable here is x because we're trying to figure out if the opponent scored 38 points, how many points did Big Town score, which we have in the numerator, and that's the variable that we're trying to find. So here's our proportion. Let's go ahead and solve it. So cross multiply, 2 times x is 2x. 5 times 38 is 190. Divide both sides by 2. And we get x equals 95 points. All right, let's go to the next one. So in the local co-ed softball league, the male to female ratio is 6-6. If there are 160 players in the league, how many are female? So this one is a little bit more difficult because this 6-6 ratio is if we had a male over female ratio. Okay, so like if they were saying there's 150 male players in the league, how many are female, then we would actually use this 6-6 ratio. However, this 160 players in the league is talking about males and females. So not male versus female, it's males and females in the league. So instead of having male over female as my proportion, we are not talking about males here. They're asking how many females. So I definitely want to keep female in one of my proportions here. But instead of male, I need to have male and female. So pretty much the total in the softball league. Okay. So here's how we're going to set it up. So here's my proportion. So the male to female ratio was 6:6. So I'm definitely going to keep the 6 for my female ratio in my denominator. However, my numerator has to be male and female total. So if I want the total of these two numbers, what's 6 plus 6? That's 12. So 12 is going to be the number in the numerator. Okay. So there was 6 female in the ratio, but total altogether of male and female, there were 6 and 6, so there were 12 total. Now let's figure out where does this 160 go over here in my second proportion. So if there are 160 players in the league, how many are female? So 160 players is representing the total number. So if we have the total in the numerator, the 160 needs to go over here in the numerator, and I'm trying to figure out how many of them were female. So let's solve it. So 12 times x is 12x. 6 times 160 is 960. And then divide both sides by 12. And you should get 80 females. Another way to think about it is if you have a 6:6 ratio, that means that you have half male and half female. So if there's 160 players in the league, just take half of 160 and that will give you 80 female and 80 males. All right, moving on. In a certain desert environment, there are a lot of small rodents. There also happen to be a lot of snakes that feed on the rodents. The ratio of rodents to rodents eating snakes is 13:3. If there are 4,000 snakes in the area, about how many rodents are there? Okay. So our ratio here is rodents. So rodents over rodent eating snakes. So pretty much rodents to snakes. So if they put rodents first in their ratio, that means the 13 is talking about the rodents. Then if they put the 3 in the last ratio number, then the last variable is talking about the 3, which is the snakes. And our last number here is the 4,000 snakes in the area, about how many rodents are there. So the 4,000 snakes, look at your variable. Where did we put snakes? We put snakes down here in the denominator. So 4,000 would go down here in the denominator. And we're trying to figure out how many rodents are there. Okay. So again, once you set up your proportion, you can go ahead and solve. So 3 times x is 3x. 13 times 4,000 is 500 or 52,000. Get x by itself, divide both sides by 3. Now, when we divide by 3, we get 17,333.3 repeating. But this answer does not make sense in this scenario because you cannot have partial rodents. Okay, so what you're going to have to do is you're going to have to round it to the nearest whole number. So looking at the ones place and looking at the number behind it, since the number behind it is not 5 or greater, I am going to leave the 3 alone. So our answer here should be 17,333 rodents. So that's one thing that you have to be careful with here when you are talking about proportions is if you get a decimal as your answer, you need to see if a decimal makes sense in your answer or not. So in this case, since we were talking about rodents, it did not make sense to have decimals, so we had to round it to the nearest. All right, so let me do one more with you guys, and then I'll have you guys try one on your own. So this one says 8 oranges cost $1. How much will 5 dozen oranges cost? So our two variables that we're talking about here is cost and oranges. So let's say we put cost in our numerator and oranges in our denominator. So again, when you guys go to set up your proportion, make sure that your numbers align with what you had in the numerator and what you had in the denominator. So our first scenario here is 8 oranges cost $1. So 8 oranges, we had oranges in our denominator, so the 8 would go in the denominator, and then 8 oranges cost $1, so we are going to put the 1 up here in the numerator. Now be careful here because it says how much will 5 dozen oranges cost. So we actually are not using the 5 in our proportion because it says 5 dozen. So think about how many is in a dozen. Well, there's 12 in a dozen. So if we had 5 dozen, we're going to take this 5 times 12, and that is going to give us 60 oranges total. Okay? So this is the number that I want to put in my proportion. So 60 oranges. Again, we had oranges in the denominator, so I'm going to put 60 down here. And then we're trying to figure out how much do they cost. So x is going to be in the numerator. All right, so let's solve. So 8 times x is 8x. 60 times 1 is 60. Divide both sides by 8. And we get x is equal to $7.50. Alright, so I want you guys to try the last one. Okay, so go ahead and pause the video and press play when you are ready for the answer once you guys have done it on your own. Alright, so you guys should be done with 15, so let's see how you guys did. So a recipe calls for 2 eggs to make 10 pancakes. How many eggs will you need to make 35 pancakes? So the two variables that we are talking about is eggs and pancakes. It does not matter where your variable goes. If you guys had pancakes in the numerator and eggs in the denominator, that is totally fine. As long as you correctly set up your proportion, we both should get the same answer. Okay. So my first set of numbers that I see here are the 2 eggs to make 10 pancakes. So 2 was talking about eggs, so that's going to go in my numerator. And 10 was talking about pancakes, so that's going to go in my denominator. So now they're wanting to know how many eggs will you need to make 35 pancakes. Well, 35 was talking about pancakes. I have pancakes in the denominator, so I'm going to put 35 in the denominator. And then we are trying to figure out how many eggs will make that 35 pancakes. Okay, so let's solve it. So 10 times x here is 10x. 2 times 35 is 70. Divide both sides by 10, and you should get x equals 7 eggs. Alright, so good job if you guys got that. This is just a basic introduction to writing and solving proportions. So if you guys have any questions, please ask your teacher.